Well, hello there, you scrub lords, and welcome back to another video. I realize I missed a week with regards to making videos, and that is because, well, frankly, I was just lazy and didn't want to make anything after the last Unicorn review. I was a little bit burnt out on editing, so I took a week off, and we are now back. And this video, as I'm sure all of you who clicked on it already know, we are going to be talking about the ship's CBT that came out on Monday. And in a separate video, which will be coming out tomorrow, I will be discussing my thoughts on 1.79 as a patch in general. So, with this one, we're going to be talking about the Naval CBT and my initial thoughts on it. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, for those of you guys who are not aware, the only two nations that are in the CBT right now is Germany and the United States. And that seems kind of a weird decision, but I understand why they did it. And the best reasoning that I can come up with is because War Thunder wants to focus on introducing a lot of smaller vessels as well as introducing the larger vessels later on, and we'll get to the progression system here very, very shortly. Both Germany and the US developed large amounts of smaller vessels that would be just perfect for War Thunder's early tier gameplay. And the early tiers, I feel, have done a very, very good job of introducing the player to the basic concepts and mechanics of naval battles, which are quite different, especially the aiming system and the way that you traverse the terrain is very, very different from anything else. And that's going to be a big theme of naval forces. It's not bad, it's not worse, it's different. And I said this in my light cruisers video as well. It's going to appeal to a certain type of player, but it's not going to appeal to everybody. But again, they're not trying to. They're not trying to make this appeal to absolutely everybody. If you want to get into the closed beta test for naval forces, you're going to have to purchase one of the two naval destroyer packs. So either the USS Cowell or the Z-20 Karl Galster. So both of these are great ships, and I'll talk about them shortly in a bit, close to the end of this video. But first I want to talk quickly about the progression system, because that was the main thing that drew me into the CBT. So the progression system in War Thunder Naval Forces is, like I've said before, it's very different from aircraft and or tanks. It is both horizontal and vertical, and you guys can see with the gameplay that I have in the background of me looking through the progression system, sort of how it works. The idea is that they're not splitting up the types of ship by when they were manufactured, by year of manufacture. What they are doing is splitting up the ships by classes, by types of vessels. So at Tier 1, we've got mostly motor torpedo boats. At Tier 2, we've got lighter craft, so more river patrols, more sub-chasers, more mine layers, that kind of thing. Much, much smaller vessels. Heavily armed landing craft, and so on. At Tier 3, we have destroyers, and at Tier 4, we have light cruisers. Now, they've said explicitly in the announcement that they made that the naval forces this system is designed in such a way so that they can expand the tiers and bring in much, much more powerful types of ship later on. So that could easily mean like more light cruisers, heavy cruisers, battle cruisers, and battleships, and so on. So that's a cool system. It provides flexibility and allows Gaijin to expand upon the naval forces without it forcing people to play a specific type of vessel that will really turn them off early on. So, yes, you're going to have to play the PT boats for a certain period, but once you unlock Tier 2 or 3, you can expand and you don't have to unlock the other PT boats that are there. You don't have to specialize in motor torpedo boats. You can go and specialize in a destroyer, or you can specialize in lighter patrol vessels like the Albatross for the German tech tree. And speaking of both tech trees, neither one is better than the other. They both do their own things relatively well, and they both have very unique ships to play with. So don't feel like it's a huge decision to play one or the other. Try both out if you have access. Some other things to keep in mind as well, some other things to look into as well with regards to the garage setup. Armor is shown on the ships that actually have them. We've got the classic X-ray view, but we also have our own test drive for naval forces, and it's a pretty thorough one. you get kind of one of each type of vessel that you're going to face, sort of. You don't get light cruisers, but you do get a cargo ship that you can shoot at. You get a destroyer at long range. You get a bunch of motor torpedo boats and light vessels, and you also get aircraft or an aircraft to practice on. It's minimalist. It works, and it allows you to get an okay idea of what the vessel can do. But again, I think that there's probably going to be better options out there once people actually put together like a sort of polygon testing ground for naval forces. But I think that'll be later on. Anyways, test drives are fine. Now, I realize that there's a pretty big controversy with the earnings and as for this progression system. Anybody who's played naval forces will realize that the progression system and the rewards you get are ridiculously low. And what a lot of people seem to forget is that this is not the first time Gaijin has done this. They did this exact same system for the Tanks closed beta test when they made it onto the live server for the first time. Because it used to be, for Tanks closed beta test in the early days, you had to go onto the dev server at certain times during the day to be able to play whatever lineups of vehicles they had. Once they brought a tech tree to the live server, they brought it to the live server in a reduced amount. I think it only ever went up to tier 4 in the closed beta test, and there were not as many vehicles as when they released live. And in addition to that, the big thing is they also had a reduced amount of RP gain and SL gain during that closed beta test. The idea was to force people to play vehicles a lot more, spend a lot more time on the vehicles that they're playing before they move on to another one. That way, Gaijin gets as much data as they can on specific types of craft, and what they need to fix and what they need to adjust and so on. Now, understandably, this has upset quite a few people within the testing community for naval forces, because it feels like, why should I spend the time grinding on this, especially when any progress you make in the closed beta test is going to get reset when they go to open beta test? And I can easily understand that concern, and I agree that reducing the RP cost is kind of counterproductive to doing this. But again, I can see why they did it in the first place. I don't support it, but I can see why they did it. It also just occurred to me as I was saying that another reason why they may have done that was so that they get only the people who are most dedicated to naval forces to actually proceed through the tech trees. People who are going to spend a lot of time and money on naval forces, most of those people are going to be the people playing in this closed beta test. That might be another reason why they're doing it. But again, once the open beta test starts and once this becomes available for all players, they will change the progression system and they will up the rewards substantially to actual levels where you can earn money. I remember getting over 1,000 RP in Tank closed beta test was considered a monster game back then during those closed beta days. And so they're using a similar system here. It will change once they go into open beta test, but again, we don't know how far away that is and what that's going to entail precisely. As far as other tech trees are concerned, Gaijin have already said that their next priority is to introduce the Russian naval forces, and the idea here is that they want to get all of the nations that people paid for with packages into the game as quickly as possible, so people who have purchased those packages can start testing them. So those of you guys who bought the river patrol boat with the Katyusha rockets, the Russian naval tree is going to be coming in the next major update for naval forces, which I've heard guesses anywhere between a few weeks to a couple months. So I don't know exactly when it's coming, but it's coming. And that's the next priority as far as naval forces are concerned. Gameplay-wise, the gameplay hasn't really changed from the previous closed beta tests, or from the previous pre-alpha tests that they were running. The optimization is a little bit better, but it's still pretty crap. I mean, it was the same case with Tanks initially. Tanks optimization was atrocious, and that's something that will only get better over time. So if you're running on a potato PC and you're looking at whether or not the CPT has made leaps and bounds in terms of optimization, it really hasn't. It's gotten better, but it's not anywhere near where it should be for a free-to-play game. So that's something that will only be fixed over time. As far as variety of vehicles are concerned, The variety seems to be quite well balanced. The cruisers and destroyers, it doesn't seem to be like one is way better than the other. The Fletcher is a more jack-of-all-trades ship. The Z-20 is more of a ship-to-ship kind of vessel. Also, the Z-20 currently has the better shell loadout. It has these base fuse HE shells, which will penetrate a compartment and explode, and those do a shit ton of damage. I should probably also explain how you destroy ships while I'm at it. You can destroy ships one of two ways. You can either disable, it will basically wipe out the crew, a majority of the crew of the vessels to the point where it is inoperable. You can turn all of the major ship hull compartments black, as in destroying them, or you can detonate the magazines. And by the way, detonating magazines on destroyers does not equal an instant death. It means that just the front of the ship becomes a giant fireball. It's actually a pretty cool looking effect, but it also means that both the gun turrets and most of the stuff up near that part of the vessel has been destroyed. So if you get an ammo rack magazine explosion, then you're having a bad day. Torpedoes are extremely effective against pretty much all vessels if you can hit somebody with them. They do massive structural damage, if not completely destroy the ship. If a torpedo hits near the magazine will often explode and cause the entire ship to sink. Gameplay wise, it's fun. It's really enjoyable. I'm having a blast with it. I may not be the greatest at it, but I'm having a blast, and that's really what matters to me. Ship versus AA, or anti-aircraft on ships versus planes has actually gotten worse for the planes ever since this last patch. And the reason for that is, and I suspect this is the reason overall, is because when Gaijin modeled autocannons actually having explosive filler with this last patch and made aircraft a lot more vulnerable to them, all of a sudden aircraft are now far more vulnerable to a lot of the smaller caliber anti-aircraft autocannons. So just keep that in mind, people. If you're flying around and there's a lot of AA coming up to meet you, yeah, it only takes one or two of those rounds to actually rip your entire wing off now. So aircraft, I think, still need a system where you're not spawning in a single plane, you're spawning in a flight of aircraft. I think that would lead to far more interesting gameplay for the aircraft that are concerned. Being able to command a flight of airplanes to attack a vessel from multiple sides will give the player a much greater chance of sinking the enemy vessel, and it will also present an interesting challenge, I think, for the naval forces it'll create an interesting challenge for the naval forces to fight off these aircraft attacks. And in addition, it will just lead to a more immersive combat experience. So I think that's the big change that aircraft need for naval forces. The one I think real imbalance between naval forces, as far as I'm concerned, is actually has nothing to do with them. It more has to do with the aircraft. The Germans don't really have much in the way of anti-shipping. Yes, they have the brand new fancy Fritz X, but only one aircraft within the battle ratings can actually use it. And a vast majority of the German aircraft have to get in really close to drop a bomb. The rockets are okay, but they aren't like the sort of be-all, end-all. Again, overall, the Americans are much better equipped with their naval fighters to take on naval vessels than the Germans are. And that's the one real disparity between them. Now, I mentioned earlier on in the video that I would talk a little bit about the Z-20 and the Karl Galster, and how they compare to each other and how well they seem to perform. Overall, both of the vessels are quite evenly matched, I would say. The Fletcher class destroyer, the Cowl, it definitely is more utilitarian. It's more jack of all trades. It can do a little bit of everything. But the Karl Galster is a very, very formidable ship-to-ship destroyer. It's very, very capable at knocking out other destroyers. It's got great firepower. It's got excellent secondaries. They're pretty evenly matched overall. I would say the one major difference is that the Cowl is far better equipped to take on aircraft because it has VT fuses for its main battery guns, which I have actually found the best way to utilize the VT fuses is not actually to try and fire, and not actually to try and use them yourself. If you've got a decent crew on your cowl, which you should have bought with your with the Golden Eagles that you purchased with this ship, the best way to utilize those 5-inch AAVT fuses is to switch to your smaller secondary anti-aircraft guns or your secondary guns, and then let the AI utilize the VT fuses, because they can get far more accurate shots in much, much closer dispersion than you can. The Z-20, like I mentioned, is a much better anti-ship destroyer, and mostly that comes down to the ammunition that it has available to it. The Karl Galster is equipped with these base-fused 128mm high explosive shells. And the difference between a base fuse and a normal high explosive shell is that the normal high explosive shell has an impact fuse on the nose of the shell, so when the shell hits something, it immediately explodes. You may not always want that when you're fighting an enemy vessel. What the base fuse HE shells do is it adds an inertial time delay for the shell in question. So what it will do is it will penetrate the outer skin of the vessel and then explode inside and do a lot more structural damage than a standard high explosive round. And you can see this a lot more on the when you compare between a high explosive round and a base fuse HE round. You'll see that it only takes one base fuse HE round to destroy the whole compartment of a naval vessel. So the ships are pretty evenly matched, and both of their anti-aircraft is pretty good, although the Cowls is a little bit better. Torpedoes, as far as I can tell, the torpedoes seem to be about the same. There isn't much of a difference between them, although I haven't looked particularly close at them. And torpedoes in general in War Thunder naval forces, while very, very useful and very, very powerful, are not so much your primary weapon on destroyers like they are in World of Warships, where you're facing a lot more dangerous vessels. Torpedoes are more for firing and making an area of denial. If you don't want an enemy ship to sail into an area, you launch a spread of torpedoes through a channel or something like that, and hopefully with the increased range that they have, you'll hit something on the other side and you'll do quite a bit of damage. So overall, my thoughts on the Naval CBT are quite positive. I am looking forward to seeing more content being added to it. I'm very much looking forward to the open beta test, although that is quite some time away, I imagine. Also, for those of you Xbox players who are coming into the game who have bought the Elite package, I think it was, for the Xbox exclusive destroyer, hoping to see a lot more of you guys trying out naval forces, because honestly, it is a blast. And I'm looking forward to seeing more what Gaijin has from it. So without further ado, let me know what your guys' thoughts are on naval forces. What are some of your grievances? What are some of the things that you really like about it? What are some of the things that you don't like outside of just the horrible rewards with the closed beta test? So thank you guys for listening. This has been Many Miles Away. Keep your track check, keep your boundaries in place, keep around on the tube, and I will see all of you guys in the next video coming out tomorrow on 1.79 as a whole. Thank you guys.